everybody. All of our chats are available, all of our Dharma talks are available on our YouTube channel, Mount Adams Buddhist Temple. And thank you, Sharona, for doing that.
Good morning. Good morning, Sangha. Again, this is Thakmin Tian Thay Z. And what I'm going to talk about today is a word, and the word, we've just heard it reverberate through the Danlei and all different kinds of places. And we use the word all the time, and I'm not exactly sure that, at least in my case, that I understood as clearly as I might have. What is a bodhisattva? Bodhisattva, that word, we use it. We say it all the time. It's in all of our chants and compassions. What does bodhisattva stand for? Or what does it mean? As we all know that our ancestral teacher, the Buddha, was brought up at a time in India where classifications of where you were on a social order was very common. You know, from the highest peaks like Brahmins and princes and kings and queens and ladies, all the way down to people that were considered even untouchables, were classified in where they fall in their particular lives. And it was very difficult for any of them to move beyond the place where they were classified. And so when the Buddha became enlightened, he found himself being followed by hordes and hordes of people who saw wisdom in what he was saying that he found in his liberation of becoming a Buddha. And so the people would come up and wanted a change in life, and so the Buddha, they would come to the Buddha and say, I want to follow you. I want you to be my teacher. I want to understand what you're teaching. And this was not unusual. People who wanted to maybe better themselves in life or were true students of how life occurs would go off to different schools to learn from a particular teacher. And that was a following that they had. The Buddha was accepting of not just a particular class of people. The Buddha was accepting all classes of people when they came to him wanting to follow the Dharma or the teachings that he was espousing from his realization and awakening times, which was all well and good. Now, you all know that, you've read it in different places, that when this happened, the Buddha they'd follow the Buddha. I mean, today, you know, if you're following Deepak Chopra, you might be following him on Channel 21, but you're not simply following him to an island or following him into a forest and living a much simpler life. That's how the people in the Buddhist times were. They gave up family, friends, jobs, positions, different things to follow this man that they saw as being an awakened one. And so the Buddha would say, you know, give up your worldly goods, live simply. You know, he'd give them the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path, and that became kind of the framework under which these people would live and follow in a monastic or grouping of people together. They would don a robe of some sort, simpler clothes maybe than what they were used to wearing. And as these people began to develop that way, when they took the robe, and this could be either monks or nuns, they gave up living in the world, and they would then simply choose to live according to how the Buddha saw life happening. These individuals were known as Shravakas, and I'm not always sure I'm saying that right. I've heard it pronounced Sarvakas, but you get the point. The translation of the word Shravakas is hearers, people who have heard the message, and they've chosen to live in this practice and letting go of their worldly attachments in order to achieve what the Buddha said was available to all people, which was liberation. However, it was also an accepted concept that those who could not or would not choose this Shravaka path, this becoming of a monk or a nun, was not able to achieve liberation in this lifetime, in their lifetime. And so they would follow what the Buddha was teaching with regards to the ethical way of living a better life, a happier life, a life that is sort of reduces the unhappiness that they were experiencing. However, they had to plan on hoping that they gained enough merit throughout this life that they were living, not as monks or nuns, but as lay people, in order to come back in the next existence, the rebirth, and choose and come back as a Shravaka, which would then give them the opportunity to move towards this ultimate liberation of nirvana or Buddhahood, if you will. So the Buddha did acknowledge that everybody had this opportunity, but you had to choose kind of the lane that you were going to be in to get there. And that was what would become the Theravada tradition, or the Theravada school that followed this path. And so the Theravada school, which is the way of the elders, it was primarily concerned with different things. About 300 years later, a bunch of the Shravakas, or the people that were living in the Theravada realm or tradition, began to think that maybe the Buddha wasn't exclusionary, that maybe the Buddha thought, and he did, that this what should be available would be available to everybody. And so a new tradition opened up, which is called the Mahayana, which is something I think more of us are familiar with. And it's also known as the Great Vehicle. And they understood that what the Buddha taught was that liberation and awakening was available to all. That becoming a monk or a nun, however, was not the only way to do this. And so it was during this time that the concept of a path of the Bodhisattva became much more familiar to the practices that were taking place in the Mahayana vehicle. And understanding that it was available not only to monks and nuns, but also available to lay people as well. The Bodhisattva vow is in the Mahayana Buddhist commitment to attain enlightenment for the sake of liberating all sentient beings, putting others' well-beings before their own. It's an altruistic promise for sure, but it was one that will allow us to cultivate compassion and wisdom and what we call in the Mahayana the 6 perfections, paramitas, while working to end suffering for all beings. Of course, the paramitas, the 6 that we recognize, are generosity and our ethics, patience, enthusiastic perseverance. I like that, enthusiastic perseverance, being excited about what you're doing, concentration, and wisdom. Now, Theravada, in the Theravada, the school of the elders, they identify 10 paramitas, but in the Mahayana school, more or less, these 6 are part of what we consider the Bodhisattva path. The 4 vows specifically are that sentient beings are numberless, and I vow to save them all. And then the second one is deluding passions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them all. The third is that Dharma gates, these teachings, are limitless, and I vow to master them all. And finally, that the Buddha's way is supreme, and I vow to attain it. So I don't know if you've ever set goals in your life. I don't know where you set your goals, but setting goals for a higher level that almost look impossible to reach. That's what these bodhisattvas kind of sound like to me. I vow to save all beings. Okay, well, okay. I'm happy if I can vow to save not only myself, but maybe 1 or 2 others along the way. And but the concept of the Bodhisattva vow, or these ways that we practice the Bodhisattva vows, enables us to look at this path as bigger than us. The Bodhisattva path, if you enlighten one, that's one less that has to be enlightened until all are enlightened. And that's kind of the path that many of us are choosing. Many times the Bodhisattva vows, those 4 vows, are taken after you take refuge. And so when you take refuge in the Buddha, you take refuge in Dharma, and you take refuge in the Sangha, the Bodhisattva vows are kind of a natural runway, if you will, to continue on with this refuge that you've decided to accept. Many times in refuge ceremonies, these Bodhisattva vows are also included in it. To understand them clearly is the difficulty, I think, for most of us. They appear very lofty and very, very, very grandiose to be able to undertake. And yeah, the words are nice, but until we understand that it is our responsibility of being such interconnected beings that the awakening or the enlightenment or the liberation of one isn't complete in that interconnection until all elements are also included. And that's where the Bodhisattva vows make sense. So rather than, taking off a big bite more than we can chew, we look at ourselves and we look at our kindness, we look at our generosity, we look at our ethics, we look at everything that we do, and looking at it in the perspective of our actions. Our actions are truly our only belongings, and they're the ground on which we stand. And when these actions support those paramitas, the expectations of the Bodhisattva vows, that's when we get the opportunity to move ourselves forward in making the world in total, in this interconnected way that we exist, a better place. We have inherent responsibilities as people who take these vows. The vow represents taking this immense responsibility for the world rather than focusing only on our own personal liberation. Now, this isn't saying anything against the Theravada school, whose primary focus was about advancing themselves along this path to be able to awaken themselves personally. We're not divorced from that in the Mahayana school. It's still a hope, an expectation that we will all have this opportunity to awaken, to have this experience of moving away from suffering and moving towards this path of liberation that the Buddha teaches so frequently in all of his understandings. It's also a universal liberation for all. As I've talked about this interconnection that we all have, it is a commitment that extends beyond lifetimes. This was a surprise to me as I began to look at this concept of being the Bodhisattva. It isn't just in this lifetime. Everything has a starting point and everything has a place where it's going. But it is not just this lifetime. It's in the Bodhisattvas, and we mentioned many of them in the chant that we did this morning, that there's great Bodhisattvas. Avalokiteshvara for one, Manjushri for another, Kasiddhigarbha. They're all Mahasapapta. All of them have this attachment to their name as Bodhisattva. And it means that what they did was they were not overly concerned. Yeah, they all wanted what the Buddha told was available to everybody, to have this awakening. But they've committed to coming back time and time again in this rebirth process that they believed in, to come back and continue this path in a way of developing merit for all beings, for us to do that. The word bodhisattva means an enlightened being, and an enlightened being, not a being who's renounced the pursuit of enlightenment. I used to kind of think of bodhisattva that way. I thought, well, okay, I quickly explain it sometimes in my Dharma talks as well, as Mahayana bodhisattvas, we say, well, we'll put our enlightenment on the back burner until everybody else is going to get, well, if this is going to take multiple lifetimes to do, we have to be involved in this enlightenment. And part of our involvement is to also work towards being enlightened. Just following these paths of teachings that the Buddha sent us and gave us allows us to have this opportunity for our own enlightenment as well. Not to put it back in a drawer somewhere and I'll pull that out later. It kind of are happening at the same time. So I was enlightened in that concept of bodhisattva. It's not about putting it away for a later time. We're working on it right now, here and now, as bodhisattvas, taking the 6 paramitas and the 4 noble truths and the noble eightfold path, involving that in our life, letting others see this path, and when they see it, they look at it. How many people have had people come up to you and say, how did you start this? I like what you do. I like what you say. Yeah, absolutely. That's how we're moving this bodhisattva concept together. The bodhisattva concept is really based on the historical Buddha's decision to teach others the Dharma. This out of his compassion for the world's suffering that he saw around him everywhere, and delusions that he saw all around him. Originally after his awakening, he desired to be a hermit. His first thoughts were, this might be too much for the world to undertake. Look how many years it took me to get here. How am I going to bring people along in this path? Eventually, through encouragement of the people that were already following his conversations and his thoughts, he put aside the concept of being a hermit to living in and of himself with regard to his own understanding of enlightenment and offering it to the world. And that's where this concept of bodhisattva actually comes from. In the Mahayana tradition, the bodhisattva ideal is central, and it's a universal path holding that all sentient beings possess the potential for enlightenment and can therefore be considered or aspire to be bodhisattvas. Anyone who generates bodhicitta, that's a word that I think you're all familiar with. Bodhicitta is this rising wish to live better, to be kinder, to be more generous, to stop gossiping, all of those things that we talked about this morning. That's central to it. And so the key aspects of this infusion of these concepts, and I took this off of Wikipedia, so I'm going to share it with you from there. It says the universal goal, Mahayana Buddhism, promotes the idea that the Bodhisattva path is for everyone, not just a select few, to achieve Buddha nature. The definition of a Bodhisattva, it refers to any practitioner, lay or monastic, who has taken the vow to postpone personal liberation in order to help others. And again, remember, that doesn't mean putting it in the back drawer somewhere and we'll worry about it later. It's going to be carried along at the same time. It's also part of the paramitas, as I've mentioned. Our practitioners cultivate the 6 or possibly 10 perfections, such as generosity, compassion, and wisdom, to mature their own compassionate minds. And finally, celestial bodhisattvas versus practitioners. And while our popular figures like Avalokiteshvara or Manjushri or Kasiddhigarbha are revered as highly realized beings, a beginning practitioner is also a bodhisattva, just in an earlier stage of the path. So our aims as bodhisattvas is identified as all of our followers, all the world, all of our interconnected pieces that come together to form what we know as this human dynamic that exists on this planet. And we need to encourage ourselves and others to work toward becoming Buddhas, to free all beings from this type of suffering. So, welcome to the world of Bodhisattva, y'all. That's what we say in Texas, you know, you're here, you're understanding it, you're following this path. This is your path, the path of the Bodhisattvas. Wherever you are in the stage of Bodhisattvas, maybe you're not at the same stage as Avalokiteshvara or Manjushri or any of the other great Bodhisattvas that we hear mentioned, but you're on the path. Don't think about it as leaving it in a drawer somewhere. You'll deal with it later. Your vows are your vows, and they will help alleviate suffering throughout the world. And thank you for listening. Those are my words for today. Does anybody have any questions or comments that you'd like to offer before we move into meditation? Go ahead, Miriam.
When I look at the four vows, I get instantly overwhelmed with the word all. I really do. Because I tend to be a perfectionist in the first place, in some areas, and so it's kind of hard to figure out how do I not get instantly overwhelmed by it, by the word all.
Yeah, me too. Smaller bites, smaller bites.
Yeah.
Joe.
I also was confused about that word all until I realized that there is only one thing. So it's like, oh. But within that one thing, as we show up, appear as individual beings, some of us are more aligned with our true nature and others are way out of alignment. So when I send metta to those beings who are misaligned so they can come back into their true alignment. And yeah, probably going to take lifetimes. But I also have started calling our group, our Sangha, Bodhisattvas in training at the great holy mountain of Mount Adams. And we are. So I just love being a part of this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right on the money.